Okay, so in this video we're going to take a closer look at some of the assembly options for multi-body files. A multi-body file, and I can load one here, is really just one where there are a lot of individual components that are otherwise not connected to each other. When I import a file like that, generally the application will recognize this as being a file that consists of individual components, and it'll bring up this form and it'll ask whether or not we want to split this into separate bodies. You can also make this the default behavior for import, so it will always try and split them, but I generally prefer having this set to ask me. So if you just leave this unchecked and click yes or no, it will always ask you when it encounters these files. The reason I prefer this is that when I bring in a body where I'm expecting there only to be one continuous surface and it tells me that there are multiple bodies, I know right away that there's something wrong, that will probably need some kind of sewing together, or that there's some kind of small feature set that's left over that I'm not actually going to use. So in this case I'm going to click yes, and it's going to go ahead and split it up, and we can see from the import history here that we have a total of 12,000 facets and it's added 149 bodies, so there's actually a total of 150 bodies. We can also see that down here when we hover over the alt trace, it'll tell us there's only triangles present, and that there's a total of 150 bodies. So that being said, what can we do with this when it comes to interacting or specifically exporting that kind of data? Generally, let's say that, if you turn on the edge mode, so with Alt and E, we can see that these edges, they will look fine. We may not need to do any processing at all. We don't need any of these extra tools in here. We can directly switch over to the Export tab. Here, like I previously mentioned, we have the STL files, different polys, so OFF and PLY, as well as GDML formats are under this, and then OBJ, as well as STEP and IJS if the exporter is set to either OC glue or the automatic mode. It'll show up as IJS. In this specific case now, because there are multiple bodies, the application actually recognized that and it turns on the advanced options here. And let's go through this real quick and show what kind of advanced options we have for multi-bodies. If you're in the export section, so under the export tab, you can click on individual bodies, right? So let's select these, and let's say we've also select this and then say, let's get rid of this. We can do hold down the control key and select, or click I should say, and that will then unselect that body. If we right click the mouse button anywhere in this viewer, we'll get a bunch of different options. Export STL, export STEP, that just says export these 6 bodies directly to these files. We can also do an include or an exclude, and that means these selected bodies will be either included or excluded from any form of save operation. So by default, all bodies are always included. So the include itself wouldn't do anything. But let's say we previously went in, we exclude them, we can re-include them this way. Or, like I said, we can exclude them and then write this to file, which will export all but these selected ones. We can do a rename. That doesn't really make too much sense for multiple bodies, but an interesting option here is the properties. So we're going to click on that, which brings up this new dialog box, and within this section, this is exactly the same as you'd see on the import section, but it's pre-selected for a subset of the bodies. We can't do too much. We can't rename them, we can't change things like that, but we have the option of toggling the same thing here again, export this body, and we can toggle that between true and false. That's no different from what we could have just done with the pop-up button. But we can also go to the group name and we can give this a name. We can call this, for example, group 1, hit enter, and that's okay. And then we can go in and, for example, we can do something similar over here. Select these bodies, properties, and then we're going to call this group 2. Great. So we've now created 2 named sections. Okay. If we go to advanced options, we see we have a few different selections here. We have all, which means it will, anytime we click export, it'll export all the data. We can do by group, by color, by selected, and by feature count. The selected means it will honor what we chose in terms of export or not. So, for example, if we went in and we said, you know, take these 5 and do exclude, nothing visually changes. But then if we go in here, first of all, it'll come up directly and say, hey, you've done some actual selection, so you probably only want to export the selected. And up here we see that's 145 bodies compared to all, which would be 150. So that's the selected. It means it'll honor what our selection was on a per body basis. But then, just like you can guess now, you can click group, and we have the group we can choose. We have group 1, we have group 2, and no name is just anything that wasn't included in any of the other groups is just given the no name label. So we can go ahead and say group 2, which is these down here, and we have the option of inverting this. So the exclude, and the tooltip explains that it's all but the defined group. So for example, if I do exclude, it will export all the data except for these in group 2 over here, or the same for group 1, doesn't really matter. We also have the option of exporting by color, and this is very specific. So if for example you have 10 different bodies and they all have different color, you'll see 10 different colors listed under this dialog box. Like here you can actually see there should be 150 different colors. So you can go in, but again you have the option of inverting that selection by using the exclude. So we could say exclude all but the one with this color value. And lastly, we have the option of doing by feature count. So in this case, all of them are exactly the same size, doesn't really matter too much. But you may have a case where you have a very large assembly with hundreds or thousands of components in there, and some of them very small, for example screws or rivets, where hopefully the screw wasn't actually modeled with the full helical path but just a cylinder, and those may come in as a relatively small number of facets. And in that case, what you can do is say, well, you know, less than, and you can make this any large number. You can write in a billion here, but then it would have more than, and you define that number where you want to have the cutoff. So anything within that range will then get exported. And then you may want to go in and also invert that and write all the remaining files just so you can cross compare and make sure you didn't exclude anything that was actually of importance, or vice versa. So this gives you some option in terms of how to apply export filters. By default, if you don't do anything, it will be set to all, just because all of the data will be defined as being exported. So let's say we go by group. You just select by group, and we're going to go with our group number 1 here. As long as you have these set, you can close out. You can write your step file, for example. I'm just going to overwrite this, and it'll tell you it's written the file. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to open this file, body step, and you see it actually brings in exactly these components here. If you use CAD Assistant, which I recommend, it'll often tell you if there's any kind of issues within that. This one is quite common, that is bad result from projection, and that is somewhat unavoidable. It has to do with the precision of the data. Usually those can be corrected, so I do recommend CAD Assistant. It's a free application. You can import your step files, and if you like you can then also go ahead and export them as different step files again. And it will actually do some of the cleanup for you. It'll apply some automatic corrections to it. So that's a way we can easily import or export groups. We can also, like I said, we can go by color. And here's something that's changed just a little bit in the release candidate, or between the release candidate and the official release. On the import tab, the info button that was explained in an early tutorial, we can go in and we can select individual bodies, and we see them being highlighted in the viewer, right? And we can actually go in and redefine a color here, or even change the name. Up to this change, all of this data was just read only. So now you can edit it. So we can change this. I'm just going to make it some kind of very visible color, and you see it actually changes. And we can do the same thing here. We can call it some name, and then this shows up right here in our tree. And the export body, again, we can pick that here. So if we go up to one of these bodies, this one here, we can see it was part of group 1. So generally the workflow I expect to use with something like this is that when you import your data, you figure out what file is what, and the names will be just like it'll be body 2, body 3, etc. You can go in, give them better names, and assign them to a group. Now I understand that's a little concerning because you can't save that data other than by export. So I recommend you figure out where this works best within your workflow, so you don't have to keep doing that over and over again. But I wanted to point out that these properties can be edited on the import part, and depending on how things go with release 3.1, there is a chance that there's going to be a new save option where properties can be assigned, not necessarily by the file even, but relative to their location, things like that. So that's something that's on the list for a future development point. But for now, this should be very helpful for people that work with large assemblies. You can go in, you can define individual things, and then you can use your advanced options and, you know, toggle this on and off. Keep in mind that when you close it, it's the same as when you make a change. So there's no apply, that's just the way that it is being set. If you bring in the same data again, and you go through the same process, it will reset. So we can go to export and we'll see selected or all gives still 150 different bodies. Okay, and all the associated properties are being deleted in this case. So I said there were a couple of other items. One of those has to do with the zoom of this. So far we've always had view directions, top, bottom, etc. Front has actually been renamed, or it's still front, but the shortcut has gone to Control G, and that is just based on the keyboard layout. You have top, bottom, and then G and H form essentially a cross on your keyboard. You can kind of pick them that way. But we've also got fit, and that's a new option. You can either pick it directly from here, or more often it's going to be through the keyboard shortcut, which is Control F. So let's say you have a large number of bodies, and we click on this little icon here, which gives us the visibility option here. We can go in and we can, for example, pick one of them. Let's say we want to just look at this body here, and the option we have is we can toggle this off. So if I were to update it, you know, it hides only that body. But then we can also go in and do an inversion of that. Okay, so you have one select and you want to turn everything else off, so you get that. And then if we use the shortcut Control F, it will actually center that. Just the visible items. That's the only item that will get centered. So if we go in here and we turn on another body, let's say this one, if we do the update, you know, we don't know where it is. It's back there somewhere. We can use Control F to fit the view. As a reminder, you also have the shortcut Home and Control Home, and this is obviously for an English-based keyboard, so other languages will have different naming of the keys. But the Home button will recenter everything, including invisible. Okay, so if we were to go in here and select all, you'll find that they're all centered, as opposed to with the Control F option, it will zoom only to the visible. The other option you have, and that's kind of built in based on some issues that come up sometimes, is you can use the Control Home key shortcut, and that will do the same as the home key, but it will also completely redraw all the data from the database. And in this case it's very quick. The bigger the file, the longer it will take, because it actually goes in and grabs all the existing facet data, all the color information, clears the display, and regenerates that. Another option, or I should say another item that's been implemented in this latest release, is a better implementation of the spaceball option. So the spaceball has always been implemented to some extent. It's been, up to this point, it's always tried to just mirror what a mouse could do. But with this release, we now have the option of using full continuous pan, zoom, translate in one go. So you can see I have a very simple USB 3D connection space mouse. Most other devices should work the same way. That's obviously difficult to test, but it allows you to fluidly interact with your CAD file, and I can highly recommend those. One last item maybe worth mentioning: there's been some rework to the reverse engineering, specifically to the boundary options. You won't really see much on the front end, but it has been partially rewritten on the back end. So editing, for example, a boundary, if you want to create edges, this highlighting now becomes more robust, in the sense that you don't have to be exactly over an item. You can see my mouse is actually moving away from this edge. If I move here and click, it still selects it. Previously, the highlighting itself was fine, but then you had to go exactly over it to click and apply that. Also, the grow option has been made a little bit more robust, in that it tries to not follow any edges that aren't as close as possible to the original one. So in this case, there aren't any that it likes to use, but let's say there was a circular path, you can use the grow option to follow that circular path. So that's just something worth pointing out in terms of the reverse engineering, specifically for the boundaries. The surfaces themselves have seen a little bit of an update. It now shows tolerances better, and that should be helpful for anyone that's used early release candidates. And that should wrap up the current items that relate to the bodies tab, specifically to the multi-bodies, and also some late additions to the application. And as always, I can recommend that you check out help tutorials online. More videos will be posted as subjects come up, so that's a great place to learn more about how to use the application.